COVID-19 has set the South African economy back years, with projections indicating a contraction in the region of over 7% for 2020. The economy was already in trouble. This is before the pandemic hit. For more on how to reverse this trend, if we can, the Center for Economic Development and Transformation Director, Duma Gqubule, joins me tonight. Duma, good evening. Firstly, let's just speak about these SOEs that are in trouble and desperately needing money from the National Treasury.
Hi, Cathy. You know, the strange thing that I can't understand is that we've known that there's a balance sheet problem in all the SOEs. The most important balance sheet problem is Eskom. Eskom has got a debt that is probably above 500 billion rands, and the government has appointed many committees to look into this matter. And for almost 3 years now, they've been kicking the can down the road in terms of restructuring this balance sheet. And many proposals have been made by COSATU, by the Public Investment Corporation, to write off some of their debt, but the government is not making a decision. And do you know why this is important, Cathy? We've seen a collapse of public investment over the past 5 years, between 2015 and 2019, of about 22%. Now, there's different components of public investment. It's general government and the state-owned companies. And the state-owned companies are usually slightly above 50% of public investment. Now, if the state-owned companies don't have the balance sheet to finance the investment-led recovery that the government is talking about, then we will not have investment-led recovery.
You know,
this is a critical matter that the government has to sort out, because we have to have Eskom, Transnet, and the numbers that you saw in your report just now, they include the cost of closing down SAA and starting the new airline. That would be well in excess of 10 to 15 to 20 billion rands. Yeah.
So then what happens now, Duma? Because you're talking about SAA. We still don't know where the money for that is going to come from. These entities that are now desperate for money in order to remain functional, they too need assistance. Where is that money likely to come from?
Well, we have to start with the biggest problem. Now, the biggest problem is Eskom, which accounts for 70 to 80. So in the budget, they said the state-owned enterprises have got debt of 760 billion rands, and I think 2/3 of that, 450 billion rands, was Eskom. Now, you have to start with the biggest one. Now, many proposals have come that this shouldn't be done through the budget. It must be done outside of the budget, because all the bailouts that we are giving to Eskom, they're not solving the core problem, which is its balance sheet. So we're providing income support instead of balance sheet support. So what we should be doing is to find ways. So one proposal that came from COSATU and the Public Investment Corporation is that the debt of about 90 billion rand should be converted into shares. I believe that we should also consider converting and writing off that debt, because the Public Investment Corporation's got a high level of funding. It's got assets of 2 trillion rands, Cathy, although people believe that we're broke, and I think it's way in excess of what is needed to pay the pensions. And we also have the foreign exchange reserves at the South African Reserve Bank of 1 trillion rands. So, you know, people say this is a crisis like no other. A crisis like no other requires a response like no other. This is a once-in-a-century crisis, but what we saw from the ANC's conference at the weekend is that they kicked the can of developing a restructuring economic recovery plan down the road again, and they said they were going to have a special reporter to look at the economy. Now, we are 5 months into the worst depression in a century, and the government doesn't have a plan. We've seen 3 million people unemployed. The unemployment figures are coming out the next week or two, and what we're going to see is that the unemployment rate for the black Africans will go up, black African females will go about 50%. The unemployment rate for people in the Eastern Cape, where half my family lives, will go about 50%. And very soon after that, we'll see unemployment for black Africans, according to the expanded definition, go about 50%. At that point, Cathy, our whole society, the fabric of our society is damaged, and our society is unviable.
Duma, you say that government has no plan. What does that make then? And does it take into account this budget support, if I can put it that way, that was announced by the president, the money that's coming in from the IMF and the World Bank? Where does that fit into all of this?
Okay, let me just make one thing clear. The president announced a fiscal stimulus of 500 billion rands. The biggest part of that so-called stimulus was a loan guarantee scheme of 200 billion rands. The loan guarantee scheme was cut to 100 billion rands, and in the later statement they say it's 67 billion rands guarantee. And in the later statements by the Banking Association, they said that banks have only provided 13 billion rands. And at the same time, credit extension in our economy, the growth of credit extension is at its lowest level because of the recession. So I would say that this loan guarantee scheme will have no impact on the economy. So it should not be considered as part of that fiscal stimulus package. The only real part of this fiscal stimulus, of so-called stimulus of 500 billion rands, was 36 billion rand in new spending that we saw in the budget and 40 billion rands from the unemployment insurance fund. So the size of the stimulus is about 76 billion rands at best. That is about 1.5% of GDP. And many private sector forecasts are talking about 10% decline in GDP this year. It is way too low as to what is needed to get this economy going again. You know, Cathy, I've been following countries in Asia, South Korea, Singapore, Thailand. Each of these countries have had 3 stimulus packages since the beginning of the year. And so they first announced as soon as the virus started, and they realized later it's not enough, and they announced the second one and the third one. South Korea has had most of these stimulus packages are 15% of GDP, and if you translate that into the South African economy, you're talking about 750 billion rand, 1 trillion rand fiscal stimulus that is required to get this economy going again.
Duma, I want us to just focus on the interventions that you were talking about earlier, and basically saying that the can is being kicked further down the road. This conversation around the alternative means in which Eskom can be recapitalized or that their debt can be better managed, they've been on the table even before we came into COVID-19. Why do you think there has been this reluctance to actually take the conversation forward, even though it is supported and coming through from the partners within the tripartite alliance?
You know, Cathy, there's so many proposals. The president set up a sustainability task team. They came up with a plan to raise $11 billion in green finance from international lenders for our carbon transition, our just transition. Sorry, I was looking for the word. And then there was also the COSATU proposal. The Public Investment Corporation has come up with a proposal that the government is sitting on that says we want to convert our debt of 90 billion rands into shares. And so there are so many proposals that are flying around. And I have to add also, there's lots of proposals. On the 13th of August, there was a summit at NEDLAC where all the parties came up with proposals, the community constituency, Business for South Africa, the government, the ANC has got a proposal on the table, but it was raining economic recovery proposals, but the government hasn't come up with a plan to get this economy out of this crisis.
Why do you think that is?
You know, Cathy, the cynical way we say is that the ANC had more important things to discuss this weekend. And if you look at what came out of this conference, 3 people have stepped down from their positions. So the ANC said, well, they gave them the option of stepping down from their positions. So from what I can see, that's all that's happened. But they spent the whole weekend discussing the issue of 3 people stepping down from their positions.
Effectively, if I'm hearing you correctly, Duma, you are saying that a lot has come at the cost and the expense of some of the internal drama that the ANC is dealing with, that perhaps they don't need to be dragging the rest of South Africa along with them.
Yes. It's like a family fight that doesn't involve the majority of South Africans. The majority of South Africans don't care about the factional fights in the ANC. The factional fights in the ANC, we have had enough of them. We want a plan to get our economy growing again. And the ANC, what we saw over the 3 days, they didn't discuss. I read through all the minutes that were presented through the ANC meeting. and what came out of the statement, there's nothing about an economic recovery plan and what should happen. And let me just say, Cathy, if you look at the ANC's recovery plan that we discussed there, it works on the wrong assumption that there is a 500 billion rand stimulus package. There is not a 500 billion rand stimulus package. That's number one. And the second thing is that it's based on a proposal that there is no detail to the proposal. So the ANC is saying that we must change Regulation 28 to allow pension funds and retirement and life companies to be able to invest in infrastructure. But they haven't explained what changes are going to be made to the Regulation 28. They provided no detail as to how this money from for the retirement funds and the life insurance companies will be channeled towards infrastructure investment. So what the government is doing, they've announced an infrastructure investment plan. They've announced many projects, but the government is not putting in any money into those projects at all.